Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the 124th episode of Stories of Service, Ordinary People Who Do Extraordinary Work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And today we have another amazing guest. This is one of those shows, like many of my shows, where I just think I'm so honored to have the guest that I have sitting with me today virtually, because she has had so many accomplishments in her career and is doing so much now on the service side. Jackie Garrick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you. So I'm going to read a little bit about Jackie, her background, and then we're just going to get started with the questions. If you're joining me on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell on some of the other social media platforms where you follow my podcast so that you never miss an episode. If you have a question, you can put it in the comments section. I'll try to get to it during the call. If we're not able to, I will always get to it after the call. And here we go. So when your organization is committing fraud, waste, or abuse, where do you turn? And how do you cope with retaliation after you decide to speak up? Being a whistleblower is one of the most traumatic experiences of one's life, and it leads people into depression, and I've even heard suicide. But fortunately, which obviously you know about, Jackie, but there are resources available and trained professionals who assist should one decide to blow the whistle, and my next guest is one of them. Ms. Jackie Garrick founded Whistleblowers of America as a nonprofit in 2017, which provides voluntary peer support to those suffering the impacts of workplace traumatic stress. She developed the Whistleblower Retaliation Checklist to identify negative psychosocial impacts on victimized employees and provide forensic testimony. And over the last few years, she has taught at the University of Southern California School of Social Work and has supervised interns from the University of West Florida. She's also the founder of the Workplace Promise Institute, which opened in Pensacola, Florida in 2021, which is also where the annual conference of the Whistleblowers of America is located. Previously, she served as a U.S. Army officer in executive positions at the American Legion and the Department of Veterans Affairs and the DoD, and with the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Her areas of expertise include policy and program development for disabled veterans and wounded warriors, whistleblower mental health, suicide prevention, and organizational leadership development. She is a recognized public servant with awards from several distinguished organizations, currently the founder of the FAR Group, which provides consultation to public and private organizations to that need development, advocacy, and educational support. Additionally, she is a publisher, author, media source, and international public speaker, and having worked on the projects in the former Soviet Union for the U.S. military in Germany, Afghanistan, and the World Health Organization in Switzerland. She is a social work master's graduate from the Temple University, additional training from Johns Hopkins and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and a licensed social worker credentialed through the Society for Human Resources Management, and a board-certified expert in traumatic stress and whistleblower protection advocate. And you're also currently enrolled in a doctorate program for professional studies at Middlesex University, and you're the board of directors for Brighton Marine, a homeless program in Boston. Welcome again, Jackie.
Thank you. I'm tired just listening to that.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, gosh, where do I abridge? And it was so hard because everything that is on here, I wanted to bring to my audience. So I really had a tough time. And that happens sometimes when somebody sends me a bio. There's just so much good information there that there's nothing I want to cut out. So I just read it all. But first thing I want to know is where are you originally from? And tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah. So, I always say I grew up in the wonder years of New York, the suburbs of the city on Long Island. And I think it was, it was a magical time. It was the 70s. And I mean, we grew up in an age where we were changing the world. It was pretty much post Vietnam era. By then, by the time I entered high school, the economy was good. We had come through the gas shortages and the crises, and we were sort of living the American dream. And we thought that a lot of the things that we had fought for in the 60s and 70s were sort of behind us, and we were entering this new age. So it was a great time, I think, to grow up. I loved being in New York, but then I got the itch to see other places and do other things. And that's when I graduated high school. I went to Philadelphia, inner city school, so very different from the suburban neighborhood I grew up in. And went to college in Philly, got my bachelor's and my master's there, and then ended up back in New York working for a Vietnam veteran program when I decided to join the Army, and went to Walter Reed, and then that's how I ended up in DC. And then that's where, as you say, went to work for the American Legion, the VA, the House, and then the DoD, where things drastically changed.
What was your job in the Army?
So I was an Army social worker. I kind
Oh,
of did things backwards than most people. I already had my college degree when I joined. I didn't join for the GI Bill. I was already working with veterans, and I had this retired Marine Corps colonel say to me, if you want to work with veterans, you should really be one.
right.
And I thought that was nice, so I joined the Army.
Yeah, and there's not that many. I mean, social work program within all the armed services, I don't think is a very large one. I was kind of shocked to learn that there were social workers in the United States Navy. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, the Army has probably the most. The Army, the Air Force, and I think the Navy has less. I'm trying to remember back in those days anyway. But they're important programs, and I think we've learned over the years that those programs have become even more important. I think we used to be sort of the afterthought, the not real Army. But now we know social workers deploy. They've been killed in combat. They're on the ships. They deploy with everybody else.
Right. And a lot of people really don't understand that social workers really serve such an important role. I mean, they're on the front lines in a lot of areas of work. When I was growing up, anybody would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said I wanted to be a social worker. That did not happen, but I just always was fascinated by. I'm sorry?
I said, go Navy.
Right. I ended up doing public affairs instead, but I just love the vast array of industries and types of jobs that social workers can do. It's so varied. What was your what was your expertise in social work? Like, what did you sort of find yourself gravitating towards?
Yeah. So, you're right. Social work in the years I discovered it, I was probably 16 doing a hospital internship program. In those days you could be a nurse or a teacher, and I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't think so. And nursing appealed more to me, except I was terrible at math and science. But I was doing this internship at a local community hospital, and I met the discharge planner, who was a social worker, and that was pivotal for me. I mean, I thought, okay, I can be something else. What? And that's when I started to really think about and research being a social worker. And, I started out thinking I wanted to be in women's health. I did some community organizing in my early days, and then did a field placement through the VA at the hospital in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, and just fell in love with working with combat vets and combat trauma. Unlike working with people with schizophrenia, there was hope in trauma. It sounds kind of strange, but the fact that with treatment and medication and management, people could really regain their sense of self. Whereas with schizophrenia, I mean, yes, medication management will make a big difference, but it was very cyclical. The women that we had at the hospital would come in, we'd have them for a couple of months in those days, send them back out, and before you knew it, they were off their meds, they were homeless, they had been assaulted, they were dirty, they needed, they were suffering from things like lice. I mean, real problems related to being homeless. And we clean them up, stabilize them, discharge them, and the cycle would start all over again. So with the combat vets, I found that when you started to really unpack the trauma and you got them to really rethink that reprocessing part, the refuting irrational beliefs,
Yeah.
that you can get them to a place where they were feeling much more empowered. They weren't feeling as, crazy, as isolated. I remember many vets used to say, "Oh, I used to think it was just me, that I wasn't strong enough and I was weak and I couldn't cope." And with good therapy, group therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, now EMDR and the energy psychologies, I mean, there's a lot more available in treatment as the years have gone by. I mean, this was the early 80s. PTSD was a new diagnosis. So we were still kind of struggling with some of the validating that. But over the years, I feel like we've come a long way.
I agree. I mean, just in my own experience, there was no conversation around trauma when I was
Mhm.
coming up through the ranks. And um, saying you had a shitty childhood was basically the extent of it. And
Mhm.
you were just going to suck it up and not blame your childhood for your problems instead of really going to a place where you could process it, make sense of it, like you
Mhm.
said, contextualize it in a way to where it was, you were able to kind of grieve for it. There
Mhm.
wasn't an opportunity, as I was coming up through the ranks, that I felt safe enough to talk about those things or to do those things. And it's nice to know that now there's such a conversation about it. There's treatment available, and there's resources for
Mhm.
people who need it. As you said, you went from Army to the American Legion to the DoD. Is that correct?
Yeah, with a couple of stops in between.
Yes.
um, so I left the Legion. Well, I left the Army when I got the job offer at the Legion, and then from the Legion went to the VA. That was for a commission that sunset. And so the House Veterans Affairs Committee picked me up from the commission to then work on these recommendations we had made with the Veterans Disability Benefits Commission. So they brought me over to the Hill to actually implement some of those recommendations and got to work on the PTSD issue. I mean, one of the things that I was really excited about that we did during those years was we looked at this idea that PTSD happens in an environment, not not in this very isolated experience. So we were looking at how the VA was looking at engaged in combat with an enemy as the definition, where originally, if you look back over the years, in World War II, it was engaged in combat with an enemy of the United States. So engaged in with so think about the difference in that sentence just by
Mhm.
taking off that last clause, enemy of the United States, and engaged in combat with the enemy means two very different things. One means you're serving under a time of war or police action where the US government has made a declaration and they've sent you somewhere, as opposed to that, engaged in combat where you're really thinking more that hand to hand, one on one, you're shooting at me, I'm shooting at you kind of
Mhm.
combat. When in fact, when you make it a more broader definition, as it was originally, um, you're talking about an environment that is toxic emotionally. And that's where, when we were working on that and we got the VA, we were working on changing the United States Code, but instead got the VA to change the Code of Federal Regulations. So we didn't need to pass a law to make them do it. They voluntarily did it. And that meant a whole new realm of people who had experienced combat or had experienced the hostilities or the trauma of a stressful environment. So, like the case example I always use is the CB who couldn't get service connected because the CB isn't a combat MOS. But if you're spending every day cleaning blood and brain matter out of a truck, or seeing dead children at an orphanage, or dead bodies in villages or losing friends. That is stress, and that is traumatic experiences. And
Yes.
so we got the VA to sort of open the aperture on that definition. And I think it changed the trajectory for a lot of people to get service connected. It also involves personal trauma, which I don't think a lot of people understand about the military. It doesn't just mean combat. Um, Personal trauma can include things like sexual assault, car accidents, training accidents, bullying, hazing within a unit. So a personal trauma is even a broader category than the combat trauma. And it really meant opening up who was eligible for a diagnosis of PTSD, cause the nexus back to military service.
That is fascinating. In fact, my friend Brian even said very interesting. He's on the call. Absolutely. It is so interesting to me to understand that I thought of PTSD as combat stress for the longest time. And it really wasn't until even this last summer when I went through my EMDR treatment that I understood that I have trauma and
Mhm.
that unless you treat the trauma, you're just going to continue to treat the symptoms like
Mhm.
anxiety, depression. All these things are just sort of a manifestation of that trauma. And as you say, Jackie, people think that trauma is just one thing. They think it's, oh, like you said, car accident, dead body, war. But it really envelops so much. And that this now gets into your work. And
Mhm.
now we're going to shift, and I'm trying to sort of draw the conversation to where I think we both want to go, which is how did this background and all your experience lead to going into workplace stress and
Mhm.
trauma?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I felt like I saw when I started to go through the whistleblowing experience at the Pentagon, um, was there was a similarity. The more I started to talk to other whistleblowers, and a whistleblower is anybody who reports or makes a disclosure of any kind of wrongdoing. So it means they've seen something that was bad, whether it's contracting fraud, racism in the workplace, sexual assault in the workplace, bullying, hazing. They've seen something and they've reported that something. So that's like the first witnessing piece of trauma. But then as they suffer retaliation, they're going through the secondary trauma. And the retaliation, when people started talking about that, it was, I'm in a fight for my life, I'm doing battle, um, I feel like a prisoner. I'm being held hostage. One woman called it being professionally gang raped. And so, this imagery that whistleblowers spoke in to me became very reminiscent of things I had heard combat veterans say, feeling alone, feeling unvalidated, not believed, feeling crazy, feeling isolated. It just had a similar flow to the conversation. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is PTSD too. It's this other aspect of it. It's surviving the emotional abuse of combat, of retaliation. And I even had one guy, a veteran, worked at the VA, and he said that going through retaliation at the VA was worse than being shot at while in the Marine Corps, because one is personal and one isn't. And, you know, when you're
Mm,
engaged in combat with the enemy of the US, as opposed to when you're fighting for your own reputation, your own survival, your
your
career,
livelihood, your career,
your
your
livelihood, yep. I mean, all of that. It becomes a very different dynamic in just how you internalize that.
Can you tell me a little bit about your own, whistleblower experience within the DoD? Like, what was the first thing that you reported, and what were or I always like going back to the early signs, like where the shift broke and it was turned into something that you had to report.
Sure. So I was the founding director, actually, of the Defense Suicide Prevention Office. We were running a bunch of programs that I thought were sort of best practices. We had contracts. And then we had a new senior executive come in who had wanted contract money moved to a company where she had been a vice president. And her husband, as it turned out, later I learned, was sub to the prime. But in those days, I thought, oh, you should be recusing yourself. Like, I thought, didn't know, like, what these are the rules. But as senior leaders at the Pentagon, we get FAR training, Federal Acquisition Regulation Training. As exciting as that sounds, it's mandatory. We do it all the time. And I even pulled up the slide deck from the HR team that had the like exact paragraph line by line of the things that I was concerned about. So concerned about conflicts of interest, appearance of impartiality. And I remember we had had a lot of discussions about appearance about impartiality because I used to write emails and say thanks. And somebody said, oh, you can't put thanks on an email where you have contractors because that's like giving them praise and you can't show them partiality. And I was like, oh, I didn't even, like who would have even thought that a common being, civil and courteous could be a wrongdoing. So, so when she was talking about these contracts, I thought, oh no, you're supposed to recuse yourself because here's the slide deck that tells me that. And it became like just from that moment, and that was, I made my disclosure about all of that in April of 2014. I went to another senior executive who understood it, reacted to it, made phone calls, did what I would expect a leader to do. But unfortunately, he was really like the last person in that whole mix that actually did what I felt was the right thing.
Do you think that this started out because there was a power struggle between you and her and you just weren't going to go along with what it was she wanted you to do?
Yeah, I think that the suicide prevention office at the time had gotten a lot of money. We had become an office in 2011. We got a congressional appropriation in 12. By 2013, we had gotten, more money and better funding. And so it was, an office that was also exempt from sequestration. I think it was us and sexual assault that were exempt under sequestration. We were going to still get our money and still run our program. So I think there was definitely a position of power to that office. And it was very high profile. And it was President Obama at the time had talking points about suicide prevention. He was very engaged on the issue. Leon Panetta was our defense secretary. We wrote statements for him. So there was a lot of high influence, high profile, funding was there. So it was really, in that way, it was sort of the perfect storm for somebody to want to, come in and redirect how some of those operations were being funded. And that's eventually what happened is.
And 99% of people would have just known it was happening, but they wouldn't say anything. And you were one of those 1% that would speak up and say, no, this isn't right.
Yeah. And honestly, in the beginning, I thought, oh, this is naive. And, she doesn't know.
She doesn't know.
Who would do this? You must not know the rules. you haven't had to sit through hours of FAR slides was kind of my thinking. And then as it progressed and there were emails and,
FAR?
The Federal Acquisition Regulation.
Regulations. Okay. Yes.
Yep. So, I honestly, at first didn't think anything of it. I thought it was naive. I didn't think it was nefarious.
Right.
And, and because I never actually did anything, I never actually took the money or moved the money around in the way that the request was made, then there was no wrongdoing ever done because I didn't do it. So I actually went to the DOD OIG 3 times and never got them to investigate. Because the contracts were at the VA, we got the VA OIG to investigate. But again, because we didn't move the money around, there was never any fraud committed. And
because you made the report before the fraud could be committed.
Right.
So
Right.
what
Yeah,
happened is
I mean,
yeah.
interestingly enough, I had an OIG tell me, "Oh, you should have done it or made the attempts to do it, and then
Reported that you did
come
it.
to us and said, 'Hey, I did this under duress.'" They would have investigated while I was saying I was under duress, and then they could have done something about it. But because I didn't, they wouldn't. And I mean, it was just this like, so I would have had to, broken the law or done what I thought was unethical to do, um, for them to have the smoking gun, that they love to talk about. Um, and I just thought that was so backwards and bizarre. But that was by 2016, that was what the feedback that we had, or was that after? It might have been after 2017. Yeah, 2017. The feedback we had gotten from the VAOIG about, if we would have done it and reported it, and then like we would have worked with them, like been like undercover with the OIG, they could have done more about it.
But you had emails and proof that you were being asked to do this or that the requisitions were being made and that people wanted you to do this action, but that wasn't
Mhm.
enough to prove that anything had happened in their eyes, which is really unfortunate.
Right, and because it involved 2 agencies, because the contracts are at the VA, and I'm not
Mhm.
the company or nobody other than, like, this one-on-one issue took place. So, there wasn't anybody internally to the company complaining, it was me, and there were several of us inside the DoD and the VA who knew about these requests, but because none of us ever did anything like that, we never awarded any of the contracts, um, um, or agreed with any of the requests that she made, the OIG never found any wrongdoing that way. The only, adjudication of my case came when I went to the Merit System Protection Board, the MSPB, and I gave them the discovery. I didn't get a lot on discovery, but then I did a FOIA. And the information I got on the FOIA really helped the MSPB make a decision in my favor.
Wow. So, did you also experience, because you said there was basically just one gentleman, in the chain that supported you, and that was sort of the end of the support. So, did
Mhm,
you experience a lot of the same things that, you talk about, which we'll get into with some of these factors? Because I definitely wanna get into,
mhm.
what we listed earlier, with the, whistleblower retaliation checklist. Did you start did were you re number 1, were you retaliated against?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then okay, so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I made my first disclosures in 2014, and by February of 2015, I was removed from my position. And when they removed me from my position, I remember calling HR and saying to them, "How did this happen? What's going on? I don't understand." And so she explained, "Well, 2 people rated you above and 1 person rated you at average." And when she said that, like, just something triggered in me, and I said, "Oh, was it this person?"
Mhm.
And she said, "Well, I can't confirm or deny that. Why do you think that?" And so I told her the whole story about the contracts, and that's when she said to me, "Well, you have a PPP." I was like, "What's a PPP?" And she said, "It's a prohibited personnel practice. You don't need to know. I'm going to send you an email telling you how to file, and you have options for where to file." And she explained the process to me. It was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. She was the first person who called me a whistleblower. And I was like, "No, no, no, you're misunderstanding. That's not what happened. It was just this one thing, and then this all happened." And she was like, "Uh-huh." Go to
Wow.
the OSC. And I had never even heard of the OSC. I didn't know what any of this was.
Wow.
So when I got started on this, I mean, at the time, I was being, removed from the position I created. And the irony of even some of that was when they made the announcement about the position and that they were going to convert it from a political appointee position to a career position, which is what gave me standing in this case. They used the exact description that I wrote and then said I wasn't competent to fill the position that I had so aptly described. So,
Wow.
I mean, that was one of the things that was like, how could this be true? And it
Mhm.
was very, I mean, it just was very emotional. When I look back at what I wrote to the OSC, it was all about the suicide prevention program, and we've got to fix this. This program needs to be more important, and like it was all about the mission and the work. And I had no idea what retaliation even was at the time. I didn't even know that I could get an attorney. Like none of this even occurred to me. I just wrote this thing up from this very emotional place. And it was as this process started to unfold that I realized I needed to learn more. I needed to understand more. My career was at stake. My reputation was at stake. I really
Mhm.
needed to understand this better. And the feelings I was having while all this was going on really started to remind me of what it had been like to spend the better part of 30 years working with Vietnam vets, combat, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Gulf War. I've spent my whole career around combat trauma, and I thought this felt very familiar. And I actually, I went to EAP. I talked to my primary care. I reached out to a psychologist that I knew that was also very knowledgeable about PTSD. And we started working together on understanding this particular dynamic and the retaliation as a form of psychological abuse. The
Mhm.
DSM-5, the text revision of the DSM-5 calls it non-partner emotional abuse. So
Fascinating.
yes,
Really? So
yeah,
there is going to be some definition of
there is,
this type of abusive behavior.
there is. Mhm,
Wow, that's incredible, to be honest
mhm.
with you, because, so many people experience bullying in the workplace, so
Yeah.
many people, and there really isn't a lot of, I'd say, understanding about it because it's so insidious, because chances are the same person that you worked for was amazingly charming and wonderful and, incredible to the right people and in the right
Mhm,
settings under the right light.
mhm,
And so it's so hard to pinpoint what it's like to be abused because
mhm.
very few people see it or understand really what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a body of literature now that has grown up around the workplace, hostile work environments, workplace bullying. I mean, I focus very specifically on whistleblower retaliation because there's an action and a response to an action. So the employee has made a disclosure, trying very hard to do the right thing, and this becomes something that's more than labor management disputes, or this is really involves serious fraud, waste, and abuse in many cases. So I think of it as a little bit more specific. We have bullying in the what I call the toxic tactics of retaliation in that checklist that I have. We have bullying as an element, but
Mhm.
not as something of a whole.
Right. And you have to decide as an activist to say, okay, this is going to be my one focus so that you can kind of deepen into that focus and start to unpack some of those issues and then really work towards solutions. So, is that sort of why you developed the whistleblower retaliation checklist? Was it sort of out of this need to sort of identify what were some of those factors, those impacts, like you say here, the negative psychosocial impacts on
Mhm.
victimized employees? And tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, so it was kind of like these parallel tracks were happening. As I was going through things myself and trying to understand it, I mentioned the psychologist. Um, Her and I were trying to find, was there like a tool or an instrument like the Beck Depression Inventory, the Worldview Survey, the Suicide Severity Scale, the Columbia Scale, the PTSD checklist. Like where could a hostile work environment. Like, how could you really measure that? And we couldn't find anything that really felt like something you could use for this type of situation. So then I started researching around what were the elements of retaliation? Like, what were the most commonly used terms that I was hearing from people? What was in the literature? And that's when we came up with these 9 domains, or what I now call the toxic tactics. And we started to parse them out in a way that you can start to categorize and evaluate, like, did this happen to you? And if it did, what kind of impact did it have? And how does that impact line up with symptomatology from the DSM, if that makes
Mm.
sense?
It makes total sense. Can you give me some examples of some of the, ones that are on the 9?
Yeah, so we started with gaslighting, which is, and the DSM, it's interesting, it doesn't call it gaslighting, it causes trying to make someone think they're crazy, which is what basically gaslighting is. Um, it it gets you to question or doubt your own memories, your own sanity, and it's a way of discrediting the whistleblower. You're
Mhm,
taking this too seriously, you're making too much of it. So it causes you to start to ruminate, like, am I really not right?
mhm.
Am I wrong? Should I just go along and get along? What am I really seeing? Am I really sure? So you start to question yourself and you start to ruminate about, well, what happened, and your dates, times, places, memories. And that becomes part of this intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks that we see as a symptom of PTSD. So so then there's things like mobbing, marginalizing, shunning, all those things that start to isolate and alienate the employee,
Mhm.
being left off of meetings, being not invited to social events. I had one whistleblower tell me, like, I've worked with some of these people for 20 years, and then all of a sudden, like, they avert their eyes when I walk by. Nobody
Mm.
wants to have lunch with me anymore. We used to go to birthday parties, Christmas parties, weddings. We were very involved in each other's lives, and like, now that all has to end.
Mhm.
So, and then of course, there are things like devaluing, counter accusing, blacklisting, or what I call career blocking. All those things that now start to really diminish you professionally. You've got if you're a government employee, your SF50 doesn't match your resume, you're being detailed, or you've been terminated, and your ability now to have a security clearance or pass a background check or have a license as clinicians, doctors who get reported to the National Physician Database. I mean, that ruins them. Even if they weren't guilty of anything, there's no way to appeal those things. And so it's very career ending and life altering.
Wow.
So that's where we start to look at then, what's the impact? What is the life altercation? And most whistleblowers end up having to sell their homes, a car. They spend their life savings. These court cases are expensive. At one point, I did hire an attorney. And as we got to the end of the first phase of the case, and now we were going to need to do things like depositions, she said to me, now you're into a $70,000 process and you're about to leave government. You need to you really need to think about this. She said, if you want to take the case forward, I will, but I'm just telling you, it's going to cost you a lot of money and you're about to lose your job. You have to really make that decision. And then she said, you're a smart girl, go figure it out. And so I did. I ended up representing myself pro se. And by the way, in 2020, I did win my case.
That's what, yeah, I was I was gonna
I
go
forgot
there,
about
yeah.
that part. I did win.
Wow.
I won my case, and the judge actually even cited the retaliation and the animus that was against me as part of his decision.
What did that mean when you won? Did it mean that you got back pay from all the time that you were fighting the case up until when you officially retired, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I was entitled to, it was 3 years of back pay by then because I left government in 2017.
Mhm.
And I did some work as a consultant, never got back into, I did like 90 job applications and didn't get back into the federal government. And
Wow.
I'm a veteran. I had non-compete status. I'm a disabled veteran. I should have been able to get into a government job fairly easily. Um, but again, that SF50 resume mismatch was making it difficult.
When
And
you say
then,
the SF50, do you mean it was some sort of a splotch? Like, there was something that was saying that you had a
oh,
ongoing
so
investigation?
So even though I was removed from the Defense Suicide Prevention Office in 2015, um,
Mhm.
I was detailed around to different things. So my resume, I was honest in my resume about the things I was doing in the Pentagon, which were there were some good things, but my SF50, they never updated my SF50. So on the day I left government, it still said I was the director of the Defense Suicide Prevention Office,
Hmm.
which didn't match what was the truth.
Right. And so when people would, even if you were applying for all these jobs, your background would just cause confusion. People wouldn't really understand what
Right,
it
right.
was that you were okay.
Yeah, and then as soon as you say you were detailed, even though they can make it sound like a great thing, it's not a great thing.
Right, and it's like you have to dance around this issue to, like,
Mhm.
hustle for the job, and it puts you in a position where you almost, like, have to be, go work for a nonprofit or be an entrepreneur or
Right,
something like that, because at this point, you're sort of blacklisted in government.
exactly. So that's I was just doing because I also do some veteran benefits counseling. So I was just doing the background check thing again for them. And one of the questions is, in the last 5 years, have you ever had this happen to you on a job? And for a top secret act, or have you ever had these things? So think about this if you're like a senior leader in a government position. So the questions are, have you been fired from a job? Have you quit a job after being told you're going to be fired? Have you left a job by mutual agreement following charges or allegations of misconduct? Left a job by mutual agreement following notice of unsatisfactory performance, or received a written warning, been officially reprimanded, suspended, or disciplined for misconduct? And then, of course, you're very often denied any appeal rights, especially in the military or national security sector. So, there's no real protections here from these long-term impacts because you have to then make some decisions. Do I lie and say, no, of course that never happened? But if
Right.
it's in your personnel folder, then there's a record of it and you're constantly having to fight that. I've had to grieve a few negative personnel actions that all came up afterwards. Like I took a training I wasn't authorized to take when in fact I had the authorization to take the training. I got a lower performance evaluation, even though there was no justification for the evaluation. And on higher level review, I got it raised to a much more satisfactory kind of evaluation. So these were the kinds of retaliatory tactics that I started to experience, as well as, the being bounced around and the detailing and the isolation.
Mhm,
Um,
and the averting eyes and the people in the
yes.
know versus the people that were still your friends and would stick
Mhm.
around.
Yes, I'm
God.
really grateful to some of those people, by the way, because there are people who signed affidavits for me that I think also helped really make a difference in my case.
I've
So,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
there's always going to be those few who stick around and they stick with you thick and thin, and I'm sure they're gonna be your dear friends for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so when they say, "Oh, being the whistleblower is courageous and heroic," I'm like, "No, no, no, it's the people who support the whistleblower." Like, they've got nothing at stake, and they're willing to, again, stick their necks out. I don't know if you've often heard me say that I use the giraffe as my mascot.
Mhm.
Um, Here's one. So this is our giraffe award. I've got a giraffe behind me over here.
I see,
They're
I
all over
see.
my office. It's just covered in giraffes. but we use the giraffe because I think it's a very powerful metaphor for standing tall and sticking your neck out. And it's a difficult position to be in, because when you stick your neck out, you risk that criticism. And over again, whistleblowers and some of their allies. I mean, some of my whistleblowers were allies. They saw racism, they saw misogyny in the workplace, they saw people being discriminated, harassed, and they reported it. And then they were the ones who lost their jobs, not necessarily the person of color or somebody who was transsexual. I mean, it was, it becomes a very difficult place to be in when you're the witness for somebody.
Yeah, that happened to, I can't remember his last name, but Robert, the one who's with the U.S. Marshals, and I know you know him too, I believe, Jackie.
Yes.
He's
Yes.
amazing. And that's what happened.
Yes.
He was
Let it go.
standing up. Yeah, Ledecker. He was
Yeah.
standing up for a gay coworker, and
Yeah.
he
Female
ended
coworker.
up
Yep. Mhm.
getting beat down, pushed out,
Mhm.
and cast aside. And he's winning his case. I mean, he's already gotten, I think, some of his back pay back, and
Mhm. Mhm.
because he's gone public with his case, he's gotten a lot more resources to him, and he's an amazing person.
Yeah,
I
I
have him
mean,
on my
and the Law Enforcement Association has supported him. Like,
show.
you do what we train you to do.
Yes.
Again, it's that professional ethics. It's where some of this starts. Like, we get trained to understand and respect and respond to some of these things, and yet the very system that trains us to do those things betrays us, and you lose that support. I mean, the Defense Department should have supported me. When I think about chain of command, and like from the beginning, this should have never gone to the extent it went to. I mean,
Right.
and for so many, that's the frustration, is you think you're going to be believed and you're not.
Right. And they just keep taking it as far as they can because they don't want to hold accountable the senior leader who is committing the fraud or committing the abuse. And it was interesting, last week I had a guest on, and I never thought about it this way. And she said something about the fact that if they hold the senior leader accountable, that's one less senior leader now that can move up through the system. And everybody who moves up through the system has to move up basically with a perfect record, or they don't get through. Like, they can't have one blemish. So the organization, I mean, it's almost like for the survival of the organization, it feels like it has to protect the people who are committing the abuses, which I just find so incredibly disheartening. So to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
move forward from this, what is it that we can do from a US government? Because this is so much bigger than the military whistleblowing. Like, you do this internationally, you do this in the nonprofit world. What is it that people can do? Because we're all just trying to work and get by and be on teams that matter and make an impact. And how is it? What is it that people can do when they see this?
So, my brain goes in different directions in answering that
Oh my gosh,
question.
this is a very huge question, and I do apologize.
Yeah. So I think I think, one, we have to be training young people about business ethics and bringing in ethical people into organizations. I think it starts with, everybody sort of having that mindset. Cultures become corrupt, institutions cover up wrongdoing as a means of preserving the systems. There's a wonderful book by VA, the IG from the VA, Special Agent Bruce Sackman. The book is called Behind the Murder Curtain, and he writes about medical serial killers operating at VA hospitals. How are serial killers in the nation's, in these hospitals are supposed to take care of our nation's heroes, right? It seems so unlikely. And yet you have serial killers operating in plain sight because it's just ripe for that. You pull the curtain, nobody can see what you're doing. And then as soon as the IGs come in or there's any kind of investigation, what do hospital directors want to do? Well, they don't want their hospital in the news. They don't want their names in the news, certainly. They either will move the offending doctor, maybe report him to the National Physician Data Bank, but they'll try to get him out of their hospital, move him to somewhere else, and then keep their names out of the news because they don't want to, one of the whistleblowers in some of these serious medical cases was told, hey, if you go public with this, they can shut down the hospital. And then everybody loses their job and no patient gets care. Do you really want that to happen? So the drivers really become the greater. So is there a greater good here? Are we protecting anybody? What's the harm? And what will the outcomes be for not just the whistleblower, but for all their coworkers? And I've had a lot of whistleblowers say, I felt really guilty because the program got shut down and now no patient got care. They closed an opioid clinic, or they stopped providing child care, or they did close a clinic. There are all of these implications that can happen because of the whistleblowing that incentivizes the covering up. So I think being able to have better processes internally to deal with that before things go externally. And then really it's making that decision to go public and taking these cases outside. And what will that get you? It was never my intention to go to Congress, go to the media. I mean, I really thought all of this would resolve internally. I never thought it would lead to the creation of a whole new organization that now is, I think we've talked to people now in over 30 countries that this need for peer support, this need for, just having somebody to talk to would have to spill over to outside of these organizations. But I think that's a part of it. And having, that independent auditor come in, having those advocacy associations that are stakeholder groups outside of the organization. So there are these watchdogs that are helping to make these systems stay safe. There's anonymous reporting tools now. There's a lot of using like on the internet and going in through a corporate anonymous reporting system. That just means if you are retaliated against and you've been anonymous, that might make it even harder to say you were a whistleblower and get any kind of restitution for that because they'll come to go, oh, well, she was anonymous, so we didn't even know it was her. There are ways to overcome that. But I think those are some of the things that I think of that are, short-term things and long-term things for addressing some of these anti-corruption measures.
And I also think it's worth noting that once you dive in, you have to dive in and just be willing to deal with the mental health trauma and the work that this takes. Many people lose so much money. Like you said, they lose their house, they lose their life savings, paying off lawyers. And it is possible to represent yourself if you're willing to do the research and you're willing to do the homework. And that's a frustration from a friend of mine who was in another whistleblowing organization. I won't say which one. And he expressed his frustration that a lot of times, and it's not necessarily the fault of the whistleblower because they're going through trauma, and I get it, but it's like they have to be willing to do some of the work and the homework and looking up the codes and the reading of the instructions and basically knowing like either you either fight it and you're in it for 2 or 3 years, sadly, or
2 years.
or 2 years, or you take a step back and you quit and you leave the organization and maybe go public with your story and help others in other ways. But the one thing you can't do is just kind of live in that trauma and just relive it over and over and over again.
Yeah, when people tell me, "Oh, I'm a serial whistleblower," I think, "No, you're a trauma survivor because you're reenacting the same thing over and over again. You're trying to be believed. You're suffering from the gaslighting, the marginalizing, the mobbing, and you're trying to find a place where you feel validated, respected, understood." I mean, I think that's for a lot of trauma survivors, right? That's the catch-22 is just never feeling safe, and I think that's for whistleblowers, it's very similar. You mentioned everything from early childhood trauma to combat trauma to a hostile work environment. It really is at the core about feeling safe and having that sense of security that makes you feel like you can self-actualize,
Mhm.
and that sense of belongingness. Uh, Thomas Joyner talks about the suicidal mind and that feeling of lost belongingness, loss of meaning and purpose, and feeling like a burden, like just not fitting in as part of the suicidal mind. And I think for some of the whistleblowers, we've seen that too. When we surveyed whistleblowers, we found that about half felt at some point suicidal.
Mm.
Um, and we've lost some to suicide.
It's really sad, and the thing that you're providing for people, which, cannot be understated, is a support environment and a support network. Are there
Mhm.
any kind of, I wanna say like, you know how in, like, the anonymous groups for addictions, you have, like, the meetings that people can go to? Are there similar things for whistleblowers?
So, what we've done through Whistleblowers of America is we have an annual conference, and the first one was in Pensacola last year. Well, the first one was virtual because it was COVID.
Mhm,
And then last year we were in DC. I think we're going to be in DC again this year, September
mhm.
12 and 13. And we've started these monthly roundtables because we felt like once a year was not enough. People were asking for more contacts, more opportunity to join a peer network or to join a peer support group.
Right.
Having these structured roundtables. So every month now, we run a session and we pick a theme. We get a couple of discussants for about 10 minutes each, and then we open up the roundtable for whoever wants to contribute. And people usually connect and share resources
I
and
love
talk
it.
about the things that are meaningful to them. We have another roundtable coming up. What is February 27th? A Tuesday night. We try to do them all on Tuesday nights, um, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The next one will be on whistleblowing while Black and looking
Mm,
at institutional racism issues for whistleblowers. Um, and then I think in March we'll do like something for Women's History Month. And the first one we did this year was on whistleblowing in the NGO space. You know, the stigma of blowing the whistle on a charity. So
mm.
we've done several different ones. We did most last year. We had different ones, and people have really responded well to that. We have a YouTube channel. People follow us on that. So if they can't join us live, they can at least watch and learn in a virtual environment.
Yeah, I have
Um,
the ticker right here down to your
yeah, there you
website, and,
go.
here I'll even share your, here's your web oh, I'm sorry, I'll even share the, website as well, in case people wanna check it out, but, how do people get involved in the webinars? Do they just come through this website and they can sign up, or how do they do that?
Yeah, we announce the roundtables each month,
Okay.
and then you can sign up. Send
Oh,
us
I
a
see it right here, roundtable series, right, see, there's a
Mhm,
link right here. Okay,
mhm,
perfect.
there you go.
And then sign up form, see on YouTube and Eventbrite. Okay, perfect, perfect.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
then I don't know if you can see this. Can you see, I have your book right here pulled up. Is that pulled up on here or not? No, it
Um,
looks like
I see the
no.
website.
Okay, here we go. So I'll do stop sharing, and then I'm gonna go here back to us, and then oh, you have it right there. There we go. Here, I'm gonna go full
Yes,
screen
I
on you.
got to
There
me,
we
right
go.
to me. The psychosocial impacts of whistleblower retaliation, shattering employee resilience, and the workplace promise is the book. Um, and that's where I've documented the literature and the research that are behind the Whistleblower Retaliation Checklist, those 9 domains, those toxic tactics that I was talking about earlier, and just looking at how this has a psychosocial impact for whistleblowers. So that is the book. It's available through Springer Nature. It's a very academic book. We were trying to legitimize this as a field of study.
Yeah, I think that what could be next, maybe one day if somebody, i.e. me, gets to Pensacola, maybe somehow this September,
Maybe.
would be wonderful is to have even more of like a storyteller type of series with people who are
Yes.
whistleblowers. So
Yeah,
we
we're
will
actually,
definitely keep in touch.
yeah, we're definitely working on launching a newsletter where we can feature people and their stories. So that's coming soon. It'll be called The Vindicate. It'll be our newsletter. And I'm working on another book called Be a Giraffe, which will be the teaching ethics to younger people. So I'm excited about that as well.
Wonderful, Jackie. Well, is there
Is there
anything
anything
else you'd like to add before we close the call out?
No, I just appreciate this. If anybody needs help, they should go to our website and subscribe so that we can see and learn about their cases. And we do what we can to help. Everything we get asked to do is different. So we try to engage and build that support and just the resources. Do you need an attorney? Do you need mental health? Do you need to do a FOIA? We answer all those kinds of questions. What's a deposition? How do you build a timeline? All that kind of thing. So I appreciate you letting me talk about some of this today. I think it's a growing area of interest. I'm seeing more and more groups. We just had a UN meeting. The Coalition Against Corruption met, and for the first time ever, the UN passed a resolution on whistleblowing that we're hoping to spend more time promulgating around the world.
Well, I'm hoping you'll also tell us a little bit about why you were in front of the White House a few months ago. And you've been doing that for a couple of years, I think.
Well, so for many years, Senator Grassley has written to every president, actually since Ronald Reagan, about recognizing July 30th as National Whistleblower Day. It's the day that the First Amendment was actually enacted that gives you the right to bring your grievances to Congress. It's the freedom of speech. So, and it was all because of these whistleblowers, Navy sailors, believe it or not, that saw abuse of British prisoners during the Revolutionary War. They sent an emissary to the Continental Congress. They said this captain was abusive. He had been a slave trader before the war, so he just had this bad guy reputation, and then he was abusing these prisoners. So they filed a complaint about him. He finds out about it. He has them arrested. They have to send somebody else back to Congress. This all involves getting on a horse. and eventually the Congress decides, no, we're going to take action. They allocate, one of the first monies ever allocated is for the defense of these 3 sailors that end up incarcerated by this Navy captain. And they win their case, and eventually this captain, he gets removed from command. I think he ends up in jail. And these Navy sailers sort of become the heroes of the First Amendment, but nobody really knows that. And
no one knows that story at all. I've never heard it. So
and I just did a quick down and dirty on it. So I probably haven't really done it its full justice, but it was a sailor, last name Shaw, last name Marvin, and they are very under-recognized in the history of our country, but they were the ones who were primarily involved in bringing this complaint forward and being retaliated against. And then on July 30th is when this amendment or this act was passed. and it gave them the right to redress or bring their grievances and address Congress. And I think that's so important in our country's history and in the history of whistleblowing. We forget that we are a nation of people who stand up for rights, the Don't Tread on Me. Lincoln actually is the president who signed the first False Claims Act in 1863 because of the carpetbaggers that were selling infected blankets and sawdust instead of gunpowder to the Union Army. So the military and whistleblowing really do have a strong history tied together. And I just think that we should recognize July 30th as sort of the national day to recognize whistleblowers. But no president has ever hosted one of these ceremonies at the White House. So I thought, well, why wait to be invited? Let's just go. And so Senator Grassley has asked for there to be a Rose Garden ceremony. So we went to the White House, and I think I've got behind me here. I have to show it off.
Might be able to put you full screen again.
So these are our Whistleblowers of America roses that we made and took to the White House. And the children of whistleblowers made these. We had them very involved in our last conference. And I mean, these are beautiful hand-painted paper roses that they made. We even gave Senator Grassley one similar to this that was red and blue, symbolizing every Republican president and every Democratic president he's asked to have a Rose Garden ceremony. So because none did, we thought, well, we don't need to be invited. We'll just go. And we gave out the roses, and we had our own ceremony. We read Senator Grassley's letter to President Biden standing outside the gates of the White House. And then we gave out the roses, and each whistleblower that attended, or every person who was there, because we had attorneys and advocates and social workers, we had a mix.
So
and
cool.
Everybody got to put a rose in this fake piece of grass that we brought with us, because we didn't desecrate any property of the White House. We brought everything and took everything. And we planted these paper roses, and people got to either say their name or say the name of a whistleblower. And people said beautiful things. They prayed. They recognized whistleblowers who have passed. One of the whistleblowers who came from Greece, Aridonikis, he recognized Babita Dorkin, who was the whistleblower in South Africa who was murdered. So it was an array of moments of recognition that I think was special. And I'm hoping we will do it again this year if we don't get invited to the White House.
Well, I do hope that one day you will get invited to the White House. And I'm confident that in time, I always believe that society gets a little bit better each and every. I mean, we see it in the animal world. I see it in the military. I've seen just such a progression of different things happen for the better. And there's always work to be done. But I'm hopeful with people like yourself and others who are working on these issues will be the spark that pushes some of this stuff forward. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the call and go full screen, but I will meet you backstage to say goodbye as I do my quick closeout. But Jackie, thank you so much. This has been such an enjoyable conversation and so important. So thank you so much for your time.
No, and thank you for the work you do. You do tell amazing stories.
Well, thank you, Jackie. And thank you all to you for your participation in this call tonight. I will be back again next week. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Have a wonderful weekend, and take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and talk to you all later. Bye-bye now.